When we last left off, we learned that Tails could actually do a lot of the hero story on his own without a mech. But that begs the question, how much can Tails do in the Dark story with no mech? Let's find out. Starting with Iron Gate, we are off to an unpromising start. After making our way down a hall, we are presented with a door, and this door will only open if you shoot 4 targets, which we can't do because Tails doesn't own a gun. As far as I can tell, there's no way out of bounds here either, which means that, yeah, we're stuck. I played around with a canister for a little bit that I thought might do something, but to no avail. Next up is Dry Lagoon, and remember when I said this during Pumpkin Hill? So quick little disclaimer before we start Pumpkin Hill. Pumpkin Hill is the stage where you get the ability to dig as Knuckles, which means that from here on out, emeralds can spawn underground. This would mean that they're impossible for Tails to get. However, every time you die, the emeralds change locations, and so you could just keep killing yourself until you get optimal emerald locations. I have a job and I have university classes to deal with, so I don't have time to murder Tails over and over again, which means that I'm going to be using a mod that basically just prevents emeralds from spawning underground. They still use their typical spawn locations, and so it's essentially just cutting out the middleman of killing Tails. Well, it turns out I'm a big fat liar, because it means a lot more than what I was initially under the impression it did. I totally misinterpreted this vague message that shows up in the mod menu, and it turns out that the mod adds springs for non-treasure hunting characters that make the levels more accessible. This unfortunately means that these levels that I thought were really easy as Knuckles were easy because they were artificially made easier. I don't exactly have the time or energy to double back to Knuckles' stages. I'm sorry, it's exam time right now. I am very busy. So we're just gonna say that Knuckles' mode was baby mode for babies, and with Rouge we will be removing those training wheels and we're gonna really test our treasure hunting prowess. Dry Lagoon is impossible. The game crashes if you touch this stupid turtle, which is needed to progress through the level, and you just cannot get enough height to get any of the emeralds that might even spawn in the main area. So moving on, Sand Ocean was an absolute hoot. I hated traversing the desert in Hidden Base. But Sand Ocean is like the antithesis to that. It's really easy in comparison, and it's basically all done in just one straight line. You more or less just need to start off the level with a bounce off of a balloon that absolutely sends you flying. From there, straight shot into the distance, and you'll make it. I actually almost made it on my first attempt, but I made the fatal flaw of going to say hi to Big the Cat, which left me a little bit too low. And if you remember, Tails actually built an intolerance to suffocation, so he just fell indefinitely into the darkness that lies behind the sand. I had to go through this run again, and honestly, it really wasn't that big of a deal because it's really, really easy. It's very doable, and of course it requires a good deal of cheese to get through it. Next, we have Radical Highway, and it actually wasn't that bad. You can play through a sizable portion of the level pretty normally, though you do need to make use of some boxes to traverse upwards as Tails still hasn't hit the gym and can't make use of those pulleys. Like with Sonic's City Escape, our real challenge comes in the form of something that we have to roll under, and try as we might, Tails still has not mastered the cartwheel. He also can't get over top of this weird rolling thing, so womp womp. Let's get cheesy then. We can pretty easily fly through the majority of this stage without any real issue. The camera isn't an issue with us, it doesn't fight us throughout this, and actually I found that the camera worked most of the time. Like, I could adjust it on the speed stages, which is something I absolutely couldn't do in any of the hero speed stages. I really enjoyed flying through this level, actually. It's a really good time. I like this kind of early 3D Sonic aesthetic going on. I'm a really big fan of this Got Ring blimp that's just flying around. It gives me like a Sonic meets Batman vibe with the blimp just circling a giant metropolis. I really get a kick out of seeing all these levels from a bird's eye view, and this one definitely takes the cake. But really, other than admiring the sights, it's just flying. You can follow everything pretty easily, and it's a little bit funny considering that the Dark Story was meant to be like the quote-unquote hard mode in this game. But in this weird unconventional sense, I found actually that the last 2 levels were way easier than their hero counterparts. Of course, they were never made with the intention of flying through them. Our biggest issue is right here where everything just kind of despawned for a little bit, but like always, I just had to lower myself and that was it. Before we close off, there's one last skyline I just really enjoyed and want to show off. Somehow I never noticed this Nights into Dream thing going on here with the big flashing head up top. I thought it looked super pretty to fly by. Like honestly, the level designers really outdid themselves here. It's a really fun and like visually pleasing level to look at. Finally though, the goal ring is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, making this level beatable with a very hefty amount of cheese and some really nice views to accompany it. Egg quarters initially felt pretty promising to me. As I was thinking about it, it's pretty easy to get around, unlike the Knuckles counterpart that kind of necessitates digging through walls. However, as far as I could tell, key number 3 always spawned somewhere just out of reach where I had to dig to get it. It's unfortunate because I could find the first 2 keys no problem, and number 3 just never worked out for me. It got to the point even where I found this Google sheet that just lists out the locations of each treasure item based on the hint that you can get from the TVs, and number 3 would always spawn in an underground location. I do think that maybe you could get lucky enough and actually get it to spawn somewhere else, but I think RNGesus was just against me, or maybe there's something else that I was overlooking. Unfortunately, this one doesn't seem doable. Now, like with Iron Gate, Lost Colony requires us to bust open a door, and we can't do that, so let's go, I guess, and move on. I really enjoyed Weapons Bed. You can tear through these disabled gun mechs just as easily as Eggman can, and overall, it's a super straightforward level that you can follow almost exactly the same way that Eggman does. I did need to fly around certain areas, and I actually weirdly briefly died after skipping Tails' bum over water. I don't know what happened there, but all in all, it's a pretty doable level. You can follow it just as you would Eggman, and interestingly, if we remember from before, pulleys as mech stages absolutely send us flying here. So this pulley that shows up at the end doesn't actually end the run, and instead gives us the exact amount of vertical mobility that we need to continue through the level. Could it actually be that all of the beatable levels here are really easy as Tails? Well, it feels like it, and so with the most minimal amount of cheese, you can get through this level. I'm actually a little bit disappointed that these levels have been going so well, because they're either just outright not doable and I don't have anything to say, or they're so easy that in the same way, I don't have much to talk about, so there isn't really anything of note to discuss here. Everything has been going pretty smooth, or it's just like hitting a brick wall. Speaking of things to say, I have a story for you. This story is about young Sam, who loved to play Sonic Adventure 2. One day, the young, inexperienced Sam made it to Security Hall, and could not beat it. This young version of myself actually quit SA2 because I legitimately could not make it through this timed level. It basically got to the point where I never beat the Dark Story, and it went at least 2 years before I actually got around to playing the game again, and I beat the Dark Story. Surprisingly though, if you're open to ending Tails' life ad nauseum, you can get all of the emeralds that spawn here, no problem. It took me about 16 lives to do this, but I eventually got all 3 emeralds. The first one was found up here, and it was slightly out of reach from where I was, so it required a bit of playing around. All I really had to do was go on these nearby blocks, and then I was able to fly up to the appropriate height. Emerald number 2 is the one that probably gave me the hardest time. Pretty repeatedly, I had the emerald spawn in a safe that I had to dig into, and that was annoying because Tails can't dig into safes. But finally, I had it spawn inside of this big silo thing, and I was a little bit worried that I would have to rub Tails up against it in order to open it, because like we've seen with Knuckles previously, if it's not a box, Omochao can't seem to break it open, and Tails just can't seem to break anything most of the time. However, much to my surprise, Omochao was able to break through this silo, which netted me emerald number 2 after 25 minutes. And if you're wondering how I managed to stay on a timed mission for 25 minutes, the answer is actually pretty simple. Every time you die in this game, you end up respawning at the last emerald that you collected. So as long as you're not too low on time once you find an emerald, you can pretty much just keep killing yourself before the time runs out and have infinite time to do this. Well, not infinite, as you do need a certain amount of lives in order to accomplish it. Emerald number 3 was thankfully much nicer to me, and 4 minutes later I found it right here. It was just floating in these vents next to all of this money that was flying around. And actually, I never noticed this before, maybe let me know if you did in the comments, but these bills that are flying above the vents actually have Sonic's face on them. It's actually a cool little Easter egg. I never noticed this, and so like 20 plus years later, I'm still learning new things here. But yeah, you can beat this one easy peasy, and much to my shock, it's doable without any cheese, unless you count killing yourself over and over again cheese. White Jungle suffers from the same affliction that Green Forest did, which are the vines that just crash the game the moment they're touched. So from the get-go, there's no real point in trying to play this level the way that God intended it to. Instead, we're just going to be flying across. It's a really open level, so I mean, it should be easy enough to do. However, the camera here was less than a fan of me compared to other stages. It would often get stuck, and so I would just watch Tails get smaller and smaller as he flew off into the distance. One kind of neat thing here that I learned is that the rain actually just follows Tails around in a box, which is a cool little feature because obviously they're not going to make it so it's raining across the whole level and they want to save on resources in this game. I really like that. Otherwise, there isn't much to say here. Tails can fly through this level and can follow it pretty easily. I actually found it easier to follow than Sonic's counterpart level. And really the only thing that was needed to be done here was occasionally I needed to fly closer to the level so that the camera would swing over to where I was. All in all, it wasn't all that hard. I would actually say that the biggest issue that arose was the fact that I was flying a little bit too high and so the goal ring wasn't spawning in, and I just really wasn't sure if the platform below me was the one with the goal ring on it or not, and I didn't want to accidentally get stuck somewhere. But no, that was the goal ring, so end of level, doable, very, very cheesy, but doable. Hey, it's Editing Sam here. Apparently Skyrail was so forgettable that I just totally forgot to record my lines for that, like, entirely. Skyrail initially gave me a little bit of PTSD towards the hour that I spent on Final Rush with all of the rails everywhere, but honestly, it's really easy to fly through. Skyrail is downward descending for the most part, which makes it ridiculously easy. Also, just to add for some fun, I really like the Pumpkin Hill aesthetic over like the space junk that we saw when we were playing through Sonic's level. It's a dull level, but it's like super doable, very easy, very mind-numbing. Mad Space is an interesting one. It's always felt a little bit like Mario Galaxy to me, which is fun because Mario Galaxy is fun and I like these weird gravity shenanigans that go on with the little planetoids all over the place. But sadly, we don't get to experience any of that as Tails. There are rockets here that can send you to different areas, but in order to get the rockets, you need to hit a switch that is underneath a box that requires the ability to break these thick metal boxes. However, Tails can't even break a wooden box, so those are all locked off to us. To make matters even worse, if we were to check out the one planet that we can travel to, well, Tails struggles a great deal there. He wasn't made for this weird gravity thing that goes on, and the closer you get to like the equator of this planetoid, the weirder things get with Tails, and it gets harder and harder to actually properly control him on the planet. Another really weird thing here is that if you hit a spring and you try to fly, because I thought maybe I could use that to get away from the planet, Tails still gets pulled right back down to the planet, even when flying, and this is the only stage where that has ever happened to me. Unfortunately, due to this, I've got to say that I really don't think that this stage is beatable at all. I was curious if the low gravity of Cosmic Wall would transfer over to Tails like it does with Eggman, and I think it does. Honestly, it's a little bit hard to tell. I'm pretty sure Tails is jumping higher than usual, but it's hard. He doesn't make it high enough to bridge this first jump that he needs to do, unfortunately, and this level is designed with the idea that you would play as Eggman and fly your way up, something that Tails can't do without his mech. So unfortunately, looks like there's nothing we can do. I tried to fly up ahead to even see if maybe there was something I could fly to, but there's death zones all over the place, which means that this level just is not doable. But to break this bad luck streak is Final Chase. I mean, if I could beat Final Rush, there was no reason I couldn't beat the Shadow counterpart. And yeah, for the most part, Final Chase is actually way easier than Final Rush was. If you watched my SA2 retrospective, you'll know that Final Chase is actually my favorite stage in the game, and that's due in large part to these spinny cylinder things, and they actually work totally fine with Tails. This made traversing the level and gaining the height that we need to cheese the level super easy. There was one moment in my first attempt where I accidentally got stuck because I was following the level a little bit too closely and I ended up in front of this rail that goes straight upwards and Tails couldn't use it. I tried to follow it up, but basically what happened about every time is that I would just fall back down the same tunnel I went up. So unfortunately, that was a little roadblock, but it more or less just meant that I had to restart the level and fly my way through the level, which I was able to do with relative ease. And so after flying into this weird light show of a room, I hit a spring, and before I knew it, I made it to the goal ring that was very, very covered in cheese. So, like the hero story, I'm going to rapid fire through the bosses because much like the hero story, they're disappointing. I'm sorry. Hotshot can't be hurt. I tried flying into him, it does nothing. I really can't figure out anything for Hotshot or Bigfoot or Flying Dog, so they're just not doable. Tails was actually really interesting for a couple of reasons. So the first is that unlike Eggman, he isn't doing this weird ragdoll thing. He actually functions perfectly normally. However, kind of weirdly is you spawn right between his legs. So get ready to attack right away lest you want to die. And other than that, we get a full-on Tails mech fight. The only thing here is that we need to do the mech fight without getting hit. Because if we get hit while holding a ring, the game doesn't seem to know what to do. Basically, it just ends up freezing in place and you can't move, you can't attack, and you can't take damage. So you get this not at all fun scenario where the other Tails just stands on top of you and screams at you. It wasn't a big deal. The biggest issue really was that I was stressed that he would hit me, but once you get the hang of it and you get an idea of how often Tails can attack and how close you can get, he's pretty beatable. Flying Dog is just Hotshot without legs, and Hotshot is just Bigfoot with a different name, so just like all the other ones, it's not doable. Sonic, like Shadow in the hero story, can't be hurt, which means he's unfortunately not beatable. The egg golem is different in the Dark Story compared to the hero part, and it requires you to shoot his nipples as Eggman. Tails still doesn't own a gun, so he can't hurt him. And weirdly, touching the pulleys on the bottom of the stage actually freezes Tails in place. The game doesn't freeze, but Tails does. You can't move him or do anything once you touch the pulleys. Knuckles, like Sonic, like Shadow, and like Rouge, can't be hurt by Tails, which means that he'll beat you way before you'll be able to do any damage to him. Tails' number 2 fight is totally beatable, and it's actually pretty easy to do. He'll start using his really big cannon once he gets to about half health, and it's like insanely easy to avoid because you're so small, and whenever he uses it, it just opens him up to being hit because he ends up locked in place while doing this attack. He's totally beatable, and unlike Eggman, he actually felt like a real boss, so that was fun. Then we have Sonic. You can't catch up to him, he's a bully who's going to hit you with these tornadoes repeatedly, and honestly, even if you could reach him, we still can't hurt him, so that's disappointing. Yeah, the Dark Story for sure has impossible levels, just like the hero story, and we didn't see anything new with the bosses, but surprisingly, it all went a lot smoother than the hero story did. And I think that's actually really interesting. Most of the stages were really easy to do, and they required very little attention from me compared to the hero stories. For the most part, I just ended up watching YouTube while flying in a straight line for all of the levels that I beat. So what about the final stage that you unlock after beating Hero and Dark? How beatable is it? And I mean, listen, I'm including it in this video, so it can't be that beatable, but you'll be surprised as to what is and isn't beatable. Cannon's core is not doable. The stage starts with a mech segment and it necessitates blowing open a door. Bummer. I thought that this would end up ending on a low note, as the next part to this is a boss fight against the Biolizard, and quite frankly, that sounded impossible to me. And for the longest time, I thought it was. Until I was kind of running around this weird lizard that was flopping around the floor trying to hit me, and I got bonked off of his foot. And I don't mean that I hit his foot and took damage. I mean that I hit his foot when I had no rings, and instead of dying, this weird blue shield showed up, and I got bonked away from it. This is really interesting because I never saw this happen anywhere else. So I thought maybe this side of the Biolizard is padded so that when you're playing as Shadow, you can't get cheaply hit if you were knocked into the water. And like, maybe some parts of it are. It's weird. There were definitely times where I hit him on the side and I managed to bounce, but it seemed like the majority of the time I would still just end up taking damage. What was interesting though was his neck. You can pretty consistently bounce off of the majority of his neck, although I ended up aiming for the same spots as there are some weird areas where you'll take damage. I assume that this is here so that when you're playing as Shadow, if you were to accidentally overshoot a jump and miss the rail, you wouldn't feel like you unjustly took damage from him, but honestly, I have no idea why this boss has so much random invisible padding around him. So here's what you have to do, and here's something that took me 33 attempts to do. You have to bonk off of his neck twice, which will typically, but not always, but typically get you just enough height to hit his weak spot on his back. The thing is, you cannot touch this weak spot. If you do, you end up taking damage. So we can't land on it and spin our tail onto him. Instead, we have to make sure that we are the exact right height to fly into him and hit him with our tail. This is super freaking finicky. It's really annoying. So the first hit that you'll do after bonking off of his neck twice almost always lines you up perfectly with it. However, after that, you get knocked up into the air, and basically what I ended up doing is I would very quickly release and press the A button, typically around 6 times, although sometimes it took me more and sometimes it took me less. It's pretty inconsistent, mostly because I'm probably not doing it at the exact same amount of time each time I let go and press the button. And on top of that, one thing I noticed is that Tails actually continues to lose a little bit of height after you depress and repress a button. So more or less what you want to do is depress the button and then press it really quick, and then just kind of circle around the weak spot to see if Tails might lower to that just sweet spot where he'll actually deal damage. And the thing is, you don't want to get hit at all here, because weirdly, these padded spots on the Biolizard's neck seem to kind of disappear, sort of. I mean, they're there, and there have been moments where I screwed up and I had to land, and I was able to kind of bounce my way back up. However, they seem to be smaller or in different spots. I could not do it as consistently as I could the first time around. So more or less, if I got hit once, I would just restart the run. Also, at around the halfway point of his health, he starts to do this attack where he kind of sticks up his neck in the air and a whole bunch of these pink balls show up, and then there's no real padding to hit to be able to get to his back. So basically, what you have to do is continuously hit him at that exact perfect sweet spot height without touching the ground so that he doesn't do this thing where he lifts up his neck in the air. And it's way harder than it sounds to do. It took me some time. Like I said, it took me 33 attempts, but it was doable. And then finally, once he's on his last hit, he does this thing where he knocks everything up in the air, and there's a whole bunch of pink balls, and you just have to do your best to avoid them. I made it to this spot like 2 or 3 times beforehand, and I almost always got sniped by one of the balls, and I would just end up dying. I found that the best thing to do is to just go at it headstrong and like really make a beeline towards that weak spot. It was stressful, but I managed to do it, and I am so proud watching like the footage of Tails flying and just threading the needle. I was so shocked that I took 0 damage on this run. Like, I would try to make it to the end here with a ring so that if I got hit, I could at least damage boost through the balls, but I didn't even need it. I made it through it, and so the Biolizard is 100% doable. It's shocking to me that there is an actual boss in this game that you can beat that isn't Eggman or Tails. Like, wild. So all that to say, I'm very happy with this challenge. I had a ton of fun with it. I hope that you enjoyed watching me play through it in both the Hero and Dark stages. There were a few stages that I just couldn't do, like the ones where you're driving or Supersonic and Super Shadow, because you're just locked as a character on those stages, and even the character select mod doesn't do anything for them. Anyways, if you enjoyed it, let me know. If you really enjoyed it, a like, a subscribe, a comment, all of that really goes a long way. It really means a lot to me. At the end of the day though, I can't tell you what to do. I just hope that you have a good one.